Hey, what's up? Jesse again here, and I'm so glad that you have still continued to watch, even though we're on day 2. You could have unsubscribed, you could have done whatever, but you're still here, so I appreciate that. I think you're going to get a lot out of today, because getting to know your leader is the second thing that's going to, if you implement it right now, it's going to make amazing changes in your leadership style. It's going to make amazing improvements in how you're able to lead worship at your church. So without further ado, let's get right into it. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 12, it says in the Passion Translation, it says, "Dear brothers and sisters, make sure that you show your deep appreciation for those who cherish you and diligently work as ministers among you. For they are your leaders who care for you, teach you, and stand before the Lord on your behalf." Now, if you're like me, you may be on staff, you may have the title of pastor as well. But if you're the worship leader, unless you're the senior pastor and you're doing dual duty, which I've done for 5 years, so I get it. But unless you're that guy, then you're the person that is the Aaron to the Moses. You're holding up the hands of your leader. That's what you're called to do right now. Now, you may have a calling that includes being a senior pastor. But when we talk about getting to know your leader, the reason it's so important is because I think this one step is missed in a lot of churches, and it's your greatest opportunity to be able to lead and serve underneath the person that is the main one, the one who's called to be the under shepherd under Jesus. So you got Jesus, you've got the under shepherd who is the pastor, the senior pastor, the lead pastor, the cool pastor, whatever hip hop name that you've got for your lead pastor at your church. That's the person that is called to be the lead at the church. So you, as a worship leader, are not that person. You're probably not that person. If you're playing worship at a conference, unless you're like the keynote person and it's your conference, then you are underneath the person that organized that conference. And you may just be one of the bands, in fact, that's there. So when we start taking this idea that we lead a team, so I'm pastor so-and-so, we stop getting the blessings that God wants for us because we're not working underneath the leadership. We are trying to go side by side. I've done all these things, guys. I've done all this stuff. I've had the wrong attitude, the wrong motives. I've done things for the wrong reason. So I'm trying to help somebody today. I hope I'm helping you. I hope you're learning something, because this isn't about Jesse is teaching you. This is about how are you going to improve? What are you going to do today to make immediate improvements? Because if you improve your worship, I promise you more people are going to come to your church. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. If you improve how your worship is, you will get more visitors to your church. If you improve your worship, more people are going to want to be a part of your worship team. If you improve your worship, it's just going to sound better. It's going to flow better. It's going to be a better representation of your church to other people. And so that's why it's so important we get to know our leader. And here's the problem. A lot of times people get hired and they don't ask the right questions. They don't establish boundaries right away. And that's a mistake. It's a huge mistake. So if you have your handy dandy little paper, get to know your leader, pull it out. Let's print it off. Pause, print it off, get it ready. First of all, I think one of the main questions that you should be asking before you ever start a position as a worship leader is, what is the musical style that is expected at this church? What is the musical style that is expected at this conference? What types of songs do they want me to do? And the easiest way with the internet now is to find out what they're doing now. Go and look. If in doubt, go find out. If in doubt, go look and see what are they doing. And write it down. Use these places to write down, these answers to these questions, because what musical style is expected? I mean, let's put it this way. If you're from Kansas City, Missouri, all right, you probably like a little country. You probably like, something a little slower, something a little more laid back. You want a certain type of style because that's what you were born with. That's how you were raised. God, guns, and church. I mean, God bless it. That's how I was raised. But if you're going to lead worship in inner city, Detroit, I'm telling you, country music is not the style. That is not what you play in inner city Detroit. It's a different flavor, man. You got to have an urban hip hop beat. You've got to have something else that's going to connect with the people that you're ministering to. And you say, well, bless God, they should learn to connect with me. Well, that's a good way to both get fired and a good way to just shut off your congregation. It's a good way to turn people away. You think that youth in inner city Detroit want to come and listen to you say, Lord, I lift your name on high? I don't think so. Let's get real. Let's get honest. Let's be honest. Let's be honest, because this is a safe place, man. I don't know if you're watching this with other people or by yourself, or you're at home, or you're at your church and you got it on your church computer and you guys are listening to this, but however you're absorbing this, let's just get real, man. It's just me. I'm just talking to you. Write it down. And guess what? If you got somewhere, if you took a job somewhere and you didn't figure out what style was expected of you, you probably got a rude awakening after you got there. Now, I don't know why somebody in inner city Detroit would hire somebody expecting them to come and play urban music and not, do their due diligence. But if they didn't, it's up to you. If you're accepting a position, I've hired over 100 people in my career. Not all for church, but I've hired them at when I worked as a car salesman and then a manager. When I was a manager, I was in charge of hiring people. And some people were really good at sales, and that was what I was hiring them for. And so when I figured out that some people are good at sales and some people aren't, man, I found out, how do I plug somebody into what their gifting is, what their calling is? I'm not going to put somebody on the phone making calls who is an introvert and quiet and shy. I need somebody pounding that phone. I need somebody making the calls. I need somebody hustling. I don't want a little church mouse. But there's other times where maybe that little church mouse is very kind, very pleasant, very polite, perfect for customer service. Bam, put them there, everything works. And so, if you're a pastor looking to hire somebody, make sure that their musical style, their musical genre is going to fit within your church context, because if not, there's going to be a lot of problems. And you've got to understand, I led worship in a town in Missouri, a small town in Missouri, 5,000 people. Led worship there many, many times. I wasn't the main worship leader, but after I got there, they found out, oh, you can do youth and music? Great. We're going to plug in. So next thing you know, I'm doing all kinds of stuff with music at that church. And so what I'm trying to tell you is, when I got there, I found out that although they did like a little bit of flavor, they did like a little bit of stuff, they also were still singing hymns when I got there. And this is in the year 2000 when I started. And so they were doing hymns. They were doing, they called them praise choruses. I haven't heard that term in a while, but praise choruses, from the 70s and stuff. And here it is 2000, and we're still doing praise choruses from back in the 60s and 70s, the tent revival praise choruses. So great church. Love my pastor. Great man of God. I was privileged to be there. But what I'm trying to tell you is that, even though I grew up in the South, I liked the progressive music. I liked, back in that day, we're talking about, Hillsong United was the band to be like. And there was a few more, Stephen Curtis was on the scene, Michael W. Smith, some of his worship albums started coming out. And so we did try to do some modern stuff, but it took time. I had to get into it. So before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about this list here. So, what musical style? How many songs? Time length is expected for worship set. We're going to deal with this in a future one, as far as, timing and things like that. But let me just say, if you come from a church where you do 3 songs and then you sit down, or maybe you're sitting while you're doing your 3 songs, and then you go to a church where they want to do an hour-long praise and worship time, it's going to be a rude awakening for both of you if you don't learn to adapt, if you didn't figure it out beforehand. Because if they're expecting an hour and you give them 15 minutes, that's a problem. They're like, we want more. We're going to sing more. We don't need 15 minutes. If you want 15 minutes, there's another church. And so that's the great thing about this, is that we've got churches from all different denominational backgrounds that are watching this right now. And so you may be at a really traditional church where you do 3 hymns and that's it. Everybody stands, sings, sits down, we're all good. But you also may be from a really charismatic Pentecostal background where it's like, until the Lord Jesus comes, we're going to keep singing. We're going to keep praising. I mean, we got to really have a sign from the Lord to stop. And so, other churches, they're like, you need a sign from the Lord to be over after your 3rd song, man, because you're going too long. So whatever it is, you've got to realize, how many songs do they want me to do? In the interview process, if the pastor doesn't bring it up, if the conference leader doesn't bring it up, you need to bring it up. There needs to be clear boundaries. When you set boundaries, when I set boundaries with my kids, it works out a lot better than when I don't. When I don't give them a bedtime, when they don't know what to expect, then guess what? All chaos breaks out. It just all havoc. I mean, it's just crazy when I don't give a definite time. A definite starting and ending time. Now, are you suggesting, Jesse, that we don't take time for the Lord when He's moving? Not at all. We'll deal with that later. What I am suggesting is there should be an expectation set. Why do you like going to McDonald's? Maybe you don't, but if you like going to McDonald's, no matter if you're in Prescott, Arizona, you're in San Diego, California, whether you're in Boca Raton, Florida, if you go into a McDonald's, you know that the Big Mac is the same, patties, bun, the same sauce that they use, the lettuce, however they put together. I never worked there, but I know there's a song. And so maybe you could sing it. Go ahead and sing it right now. Pause this. I'll give you a break. You sing the McDonald's Big Mac song. All right, good. So when you go into McDonald's, you know what to expect. You don't have to wonder. You have a set thing that happens every time you go to McDonald's. You know that what their fries are like. You know what their Happy Meals are all about. You don't have to wonder. Whether I go here or in another place, it's predictable. And the reason people keep coming back is because it's predictable. Now, fast forward to, let's say, another business that's like a small business, let's say a struggling small business owner. You've got a struggling small business owner that you never know when he's going to be open because he puts a sign up, "Oh, I'll be gone for 2 hours." You're like, well, I have right now. I don't have 2 hours and I'll come back. Sorry, my business is done. I'm going to go elsewhere. Because it's not predictable. He's got a sign on the door, 8 to 5. But you can't predict whether they're going to be there or not. And so what happens? You go somewhere else that you can predict. You know their store is open from this time to this time. It's predictable. Now, we're in the ministry. We're leading worship. We're leading people into the presence of God. But there should be an element of predictability, even if your predictability is unpredictable. Meaning, even if people come because they never know how long you're going to go in the presence of God because you're worshiping and all that stuff, that's awesome. But it needs to be consistent. Don't do a 10-minute service one Sunday and then an hour the next Sunday. Man, you're going to be sending all kinds of mixed messages. So what we're talking about is establishing boundaries. What about, do you know what groups you're going to be leading? I mean, you may think you're just coming to be the worship leader, but you get there and they're like, yeah, we want you to do the youth and the children and the Sunday schools and we want you to go into prisons, and we want you to, lead up all these things. That's fine. That's great. That's awesome. But just find out ahead of time. I mean, it would be horrible to get there and then find out that it's all different, that it's all changed. It would be horrible to have an expectation of something, but you didn't talk about it, and you get there and it's different than what you thought about. So my point is, get a boundary established. Know what you're going to be doing. Know what the expectations of you are, and know what you expect from your pastor, from your leader, from your conference host. Know what to expect. And then another thing, how can you lighten the load? I would say if you're not asking that question, you should be. If you're trying to become a worship leader, when you have an interview, one of the greatest things when they say, do you have any questions for me? Yes, sir, I do. Yes, ma'am, I do. How can I help you? How can I be a blessing to your church? I'll tell you what, you ask that question because so many people are trying to be famous. So many people are trying to be a leader, but they don't want to, they don't have any followers. They just want to lead, but they don't want to put in the work, the effort. They don't want to know how they can bless somebody. They only know what they can get out of it for themselves. Oh man, I'm going to be a worship leader of a 5,000 member church. I'm going to be on YouTube every Sunday. I bet you if I write some songs, I might get them published. I bet you it'll be in the CCLI. Hey, we're going to put a band together and we're going to tour. And next thing you know, you've got all these grandiose ideas of what your position is, but you haven't laid the groundwork. You haven't put in the work. You haven't put in the time, and you haven't asked the big question, which is, how can I lighten your load, Pastor? How can I lighten your load, conference host? How can I be a blessing to you? And we just want to be blessed ourselves. And I tell you what, the best churches, the best worship leaders, the best times I've had as a worship leader is when me and my pastor were like this, man. Yeah, not holding hands, but we were tight. We were like mesh. It was like a perfect handoff. I knew right when to end the music. I knew right when to turn it over. We would flow with one another. We knew we had signals down, and it was professional. There was a professional handoff. There was always order in the service. There was always an accountability, because if God wanted to move, we allowed him to move. I would have signals with my pastor. We would know between each other when it was time for God to do something and when it was time for everybody to sit down. Let's move on to the next part of the service. So it was great. It was fantastic. It was awesome because we built a relationship. And so another question, last question on here is, how many changes are you expected to make? And do you have the support of your pastor or your leader to make those changes? So let me talk about this for a second. Now, here's a common problem, a common mistake that either young worship leaders or just people who were never taught make. Here's the mistake. They make the mistake of coming in and they want to change everything right away. They're like, I don't want to do that style of music anymore. We're going to do 4 new songs this Sunday. Horrible mistake. Man, first of all, if you already have a team, if you're coming and you already have a team and you haven't built any rapport with your team, but you're like, we're going to do 4 new songs, they're going to have to learn all these new songs, maybe in 1 week. Because that's usually how much time you give them. Maybe even Sunday morning, you're like, well, let's learn this new song. And what else happens is the congregation, none of them know what to sing because you've never done those songs with that congregation before. And then another mistake, you just assume everybody listens to the same type of music as you do. And so the big changes all of a sudden, it's a huge problem, huge mistake. And then who's going to get the calls? Well, you may get a couple calls like, hey, man, you just made so many changes, I just couldn't follow along. But then the pastor is going to get this from the congregation. Well, that new guy you hired, that new girl that you hired, she just didn't sing the songs like I'm used to. Trust me, it'll happen. You go in and make all those changes. The best thing you could do is find out from your leader, from your pastor, from the conference leader, from the conference host. What is the expectation? What are these people? Are there some songs? Can you give me a list of some songs that you guys do on a regular basis? Can I talk to the person who's leading right now? Can I talk to somebody? What do you want from me? Because I want to come in here, and maybe you're being hired to make changes, but your pastor, your leader doesn't want you to make all the changes all at one time. Okay? It's a huge mistake. You've got to ease into this. When I was 20, I came right from Bible school. I was all excited. I was hired to be the youth pastor. And then pretty soon I was doing worship too. But what happened when I got there was I was in a town of 5,000 people. And my pastor was right around 50 years old. I was 20. Yes, I graduated from high school at 16, so I had 4 years. So I went right there and we started talking. And, I found out my first Sunday that somebody came, oh, I saw you doing your laundry, because I had gone to the laundromat. Well, I found out what a small town was really, really quickly. And so I found out that if I was going to make any headway, first of all, I was going to have to befriend my pastor, because he knew like everybody in town. And sometimes I was blessed because I was with somebody that knew everybody. So just by association of being with him as we would go to lunch, or we would go here, or we would go there, just by my association with him, he was blessing me because I was associated with him. So by getting to know my leader, he was blessing me. And another thing, he had been there, his entire life. He's 50 years old. And he didn't want the songs to stay the same like they were. He didn't want those choruses from the 70s. He wanted more modern stuff. But he knew that we're going to have to do it gradually. So he right after I got there, he started a second service, and started at 8:30 a.m. and had a band play. And the first service they had 20. And the next service they had like 30 or 40. Pretty soon word got around, and like all the younger people, all the people that wanted the modern stuff, left the later service and started coming to the early service. And it was awesome, man. I'll tell you what, God really moved in that church. That church, by the time I left, was around 350 people. And that was in a town of 5,000. So you can imagine, that's a big church in a small town. And God was really moving, but I had the most awesome relationship with my pastor at that church. We went fishing together. We spent a lot of time together. He mentored me. And you know what I did? I made some really dumb decisions because I was a hot shot. I thought I knew. And, I wanted to change all this. I said, we need to implement we need to implement all these rules. We need to have an audition for people that want to be a part. All the dumb things all the mistakes that people make, especially in a small town. So I'm talking to people, you're probably listening to this because you're in a small or medium-sized church and you want to know how to get better. Well, that's what this is about. It didn't get better overnight. It took time. It took effort. It took a relationship with my pastor. That's what I had to develop. And so, if you keep listening, we won't go too much longer, but if you keep listening, I'm going to tell you the most important thing that I did at that church at the end. And so you have got to understand that if you want to make changes, that's fine, but you need to be on board with your pastor. Because first of all, never go around your pastor's back to try to make changes. Don't start whispering in the congregation's ear. If you have a board at your church, don't start whispering in your board members. Man, wouldn't it be awesome if we started doing this? Wouldn't it be great if we started doing that? That's all fine. but you can say that after you've had the conversation with your pastor. If you haven't had a conversation with your leader or your pastor about something related to the worship, related to spiritual growth of the church, related to making any changes at the church, then you are doing yourself and the church a disservice, because he or she, as the leader, as the under shepherd, deserves to know first. They should be the first one. And then if you get their blessing and then you want to start talking about that with some other people, that's fine. Start planting seeds. But your leader needs to know first. And if you say, well, they wouldn't approve those changes, well, then they're changes you do not have any right to make. You shouldn't be making. You're being a snake. You're going around your leader's back. And I've done a little of this. I won't say I have done it too much, especially in this church, but there's been times where I wanted to do something different. I wanted to make a change. I wanted to go around my pastor's back. And it was a horrible thing, horrible idea. It's against the Bible. That person, that man or woman of God that's in that position deserves our respect and deserves to be in the loop on everything. Here's the thing. You've got one department probably. Me at this church, I had two. I was doing worship, but I was primarily hired to be a youth pastor. So at this particular church, I had two departments, but the pastor not only has that, he's got the women's ministry, the men's ministry, the Royal Rangers and Missionettes at that church. He's got, the benevolence ministry. We had what was called the Love Center, which wasn't about marriage or counseling. It was actually our food donation center in the back of the church. He had that ministry, the youth, the children, all the different ministries of the church to worry about, not just the one area that's the most important to me because I'm in charge of it. But you have to understand, they're trying to juggle all these areas, and yet we are trying to say, well, mine is the most important. You've got to be a team player. If you're going to get on your pastor's side, you've got to be a team player. So on the back side of this, I want you to look at this on the second page. Ways that you can be a blessing. How can you bless your pastor? How can you bless your conference leader? Well, I would say this. Once you have that relationship, that tight-knit relationship, take charge. Schedule all the practices for weekend services, for events, for youth and children. If you're leading worship for this stuff, say, with your blessing, pastor, leader, I'm going to schedule all this. I'm going to get the teams together. If you were doing it before, you don't have to worry about that now. You hired me. I'm going to take care of my department because I want to be a blessing to you. That will bless them so much. Even if they're on the worship team, that's okay. They might play a guitar or play piano and be the pastor. But you can be a blessing by making sure that all the practices are scheduled, by making sure that the sound person is there, by making sure that the sound is turned on. These are all things you can do. The second thing, come prepared to every service and event and start on time. I can't tell you how annoying it is when the worship doesn't start till 10 minutes after the start of the service. Why is that? Why is that? It's because of poor planning. It's because you don't have your team in order. It's probably because you were practicing too close to the service, because you didn't practice enough at your practice time, or your practice time got cut short, or it got dominated by one person that wasn't able to measure up to the rest of the team because they didn't practice on themselves personally. And so you've got to understand, you need to come prepared. What does that mean? That means you've got to have the sound, the lights on, everything tested. Everything should be ready. People should come from work, from their jobs, to volunteer. Remember, you're probably paid. They're probably volunteers. They're volunteering their time. They're coming on let's say a Thursday night. They're, probably not going to say goodnight to their kids. Maybe they will. Depends on what time they go to bed. They're probably, maybe rushing through dinner if they get dinner at all. They're coming. They got to bring their gear sometimes. And so the last thing they need is an unprepared worship leader to be there and, Hey guys, I'm going to flip the sound system on. Hey guys, I'm going to, hey, you can't do that. If you want to be a blessing to your pastor, you need to be prepared. And you need to, like, if you start at 10 a.m. on a Sunday, then at 9:58 a.m., every person should be at their post. All the guitarists should have their guitars on. All the keyboardists should have their ear thing in and be at the keyboard. The musicians should have their mics ready to go, so that when the clock strikes 10, you start. Be a blessing to your leader, to your pastor, and start on time. I've heard some worship leaders say, well, my pastor likes to go and greet everybody and things like that. I promise you, 99% of pastors want to start on time. It's usually the worship leader's fault, not being ready, not being on time. And once again, this goes back to being predictable. And see, this is a reason why sometimes churches don't grow, is because you never know when they're going to start. You don't know what to expect. There are people that are coming into your services hurting. They're coming in broken and bruised. Life has beat them down. Life has told them, you don't matter. You don't amount to anything. They come in your service expecting that. And they purposely come at 10 after. You know why? Because they don't want to talk to anybody. They want to slip in the back. And here we are beating them up for this, when we should be the ones cheering the fact that somebody came to church. We should be cheering the fact that they slipped in, that they came in, that they said, there's something wrong in my life and I know I've got to fill this void. If you will give them a worship experience, if you will set the table, they're the only ones that can eat, but if you set the table, if you put all the fixings out, man, they're going to eat, and pretty soon they're going to start visiting. They're going to start coming on time. They're going to start coming early. They're going to start coming to your small groups. They're going to start visiting and making relationships. But if they try to slip in, and then the worship is in disarray and nobody knows when to start, and nobody's in the same key because you made a key change right before church and you didn't tell anybody. These are all things that add to the frustration of your pastor and don't bless them. They add to the frustration of the conference organizer, and it's not a blessing to them. You have got to start on time. Another thing, keep 4 or 5 songs ready at all times for altar calls, baptisms, and unknown events. Have some of your go-tos, have them ready. If your pastor calls you up and says, hey, we want to, I want to bring the band up. Be ready, man. Have a plan in place. Say, hey, here's 2 or 3 songs. Here's 4 or 5 songs that we could possibly do, and communicate it to them. I helped out at a church for a brief period of time, but I was also one of the worship leaders. There was another main worship leader, and sometimes he would text us, in service. So hopefully you had your sound down. But he would text us and let us know, hey, at the end we're going to go up and we're going to do this song. And I appreciated that, because then you know what to expect. You know what you're doing. You have developed this relationship with your pastor to where you can be ready to be a blessing to them. Another thing, be flexible. Always be ready to change something if asked. Maybe the pastor heard you singing that song that you thought was so awesome, that you heard on K-Love. And they're like, you know what? That doesn't totally jive with my theology, or I just hate the song. All right? What some youth pastors, what some worship leaders do is they start bristling. Those little porcupine bristles start going ping, 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 ping. All right? They start bristling up. They start like, oh, I can't believe I was asked to change something. And they get offended. And we talked about this in the last video. They get offended easily. And next thing you know, they're upset, they're angry. Instead of saying, yes, sir, of course we'll change that. No problem. I don't have any favorite songs. I want to go in the direction that the Lord's leading you, because you're the leader of this church. You listen to the shepherd, Jesus Christ, and I'm expecting that you do. And so I'm going to lead I'm going to lead my team underneath you because you're the leader. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. That's what we're going to do. Yes, we will do it. Not a problem. We're good. Yes, absolutely. That's the response. That's the response your pastor needs. Your pastor needs to know that you're on their side. Your conference leader. If they say, well, we had time for 12 songs, but we had this last minute change, and so we can only do 10. Don't get upset. Don't get mad. Well, the kids came to see me. Well, the marriage couples, they came to hear our band. Well, maybe, but you got to be flexible. They can still hear you do 10 songs instead of 12. Why does it have to be that we have to insist on our own right? I think there's some verses about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 about love is patient, love is kind. It doesn't insist on getting its own way, is what one version says. So it's okay if somebody has a different idea, and we have to be willing to be flexible. Another thing, keep open lines of communication with your leader, your pastor. Keep open lines. The worst thing you could do is bottle it up inside, what you feel. If they're worth their salt as a leader, as a pastor, if they're worth anything, if they have learned anything from the Bible, they will be so thankful that you were honest rather than lying or really feeling something else. You should have the kind of relationship with your pastor where if you can get to this point to where maybe they'll suggest something to you and maybe it'll sit the wrong way with you, and you'll just, instead of holding it in, you'll be able to talk to him and say, hey, I know you said no on that song. Do you mind explaining why? Because I really like that song. And then they're going to tell you why. Now, why do you have to be afraid of having a conversation, an honest conversation? If you're that afraid to have an honest conversation with your pastor, then you're probably at the wrong church. You're probably not a good fit. If you can't have an honest conversation with the conference leader who booked you, then you're probably not the right person for that conference. Because if you can't have an honest conversation, then what are we doing? What do we do? Like, why would you be the person? You have to be part of the vision of the church. You have to be linked up with the pastor. You have to be linked up with that conference. If the conference is about missions, but your heart is inner city, that's great. They can kind of be compatible. But if you're trying to make missionary-minded people have a heart for something different than what the conference is created for, then you're going to have some problems. You have to work within the confines of what it is that you're doing. Meaning, if you're at a church where the pastor values cell groups and you're not a part of one of the groups, that's a problem. If you're a part of a church where the main DNA of the church is a feeding program, when the pastor's heart is to feed all these people, but you have no desire to help with the feeding program and that's not in your heart, guess what? You're probably at the wrong church. Because either you're going to get on board with the vision of the church, or you shouldn't be one of the leaders of the church. We've got to be real, man. We've got to be real that you need to develop a relationship so that you can be real with the person who's in charge, the person who hired you, the person who's leading you. Maybe you're at a giant church and you feel like just a cog in the wheel. Maybe you're a worship leader at a church of 20,000 people, but there's three other worship leaders, and you feel like just one of the people getting lost in the noise. Well, maybe you should be at a smaller church. Maybe you should be the main person at a smaller church. Maybe that 10,000 member church, they hired you because you're talented, but you don't hook up with the vision of the church. You have to be hooked up. You have to be connected. You have to get to know the person leading the thing. If you are not hooked up and you're not connected, you have to leave. And I've done that twice. 2 times I was on staff at 2 different churches where I was absolutely not at all hooked up with the vision of the church. On staff, paid staff. And you say, well, that's kind of wrong. Well, first of all, I didn't ask all the questions before I got there. I'm trying to help somebody. I'm trying to help. If you're having some problems, I'm hoping that you haven't gotten to the place where you realize that you're at the wrong church. But if you are, this is going to be a blessing to you. Because guess what? There's a lot of churches out there that need good worship leaders. So it's okay. It's okay if you leave. And I promise you, if your pastor or your leader knows that you're not connected with the vision of the church, they probably don't want you in the position either. So it's going to be a win-win for you to leave sometimes. But at the same time, if it's just because you're being a little punk, which I've done that, all right? If you're just being a little punk and you need to submit to some leadership and you're just out on your own doing your own thing and you don't care, I'm trying to help you as well, because if you develop a relationship, let the pastor see your heart, guess what? You're going to be able to make those changes you want, because if you guys are combined heart to heart and you have the same vision, the same direction that you're going, the gates of hell are not going to be able to prevail against that church. That's how powerful it is. But I'll tell you what, the biggest thing that divides churches is gossip and backbiting and holding things within the congregation and whispers. I've been in a couple churches. I was raised in a church where the pastor's wife occasionally spoke from the pulpit. And I'm sorry if that's a problem for you. I don't have any problem with it. I see Deborah in the Bible singing songs and leading, in Judges. So if you have a problem with women in leadership, I'm not the guy for you. But what I am going to say is this. She wanted to, and so all of a sudden, little whispers start happening, and my parents hear about this group that's going to get together, and they're going to talk to the pastor about this unruly situation of how he's letting his woman talk it from the pulpit. This is in the 90s, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And, next thing I know, my pastor, the man that started the church, founded the church, he's kicked out of his own church because his wife, who's been speaking in that church for a number of years, all of a sudden some people had a problem with it, started backbiting, started fighting, started gossiping. That's not love. That's from a lack of understanding of leadership. There's plenty of churches, if you didn't want to go to the church, they could have gone down the street to plenty of churches where only men spoke, and they would have been fine. But no, they had to go and correct the wrong. So what I'm going to say is this, is if you're in a place where you feel like you need to correct your pastor, it's time to leave. Don't be the person that splits the church. Don't be the person that, starts rumors in the church. It's one of the major sins in the Bible in Proverbs. Gossiping, slandering, backbiting. God hates it. He hates it with a passion. It's not from God. So you've got to understand, who is the leader? The pastor? Who is the leader of a conference? The conference leader, whoever put it together. You've got to submit to their leadership or else move on. Don't submit, but if you can't submit, you don't need to be in that position. It's as simple as that. And so people are going to have faults. Your pastor's going to have faults. You're going to have faults. You're probably going to have more faults than your pastor, but sometimes it may feel like they have more faults. What are you doing? Are you praying for them? Are you asking God to bless them? Are you asking God to help them? What are you doing to help the problem? Are you contributing to the problem or the solution? You got to be real and honest with yourself. So let me end with this, and this is the nugget that I learned that really helped me. More than likely, your pastor or your leader has more experience than you. They've been in ministry longer than you, Or maybe they're just simply called to the position of pastor or leader, and you're not. And maybe you're called to be a Timothy. And the more you can learn to be a Timothy, to be a blessing to your pastor, the more you can lift up their hands and lighten their load, God will promote you. I promise you, God will promote you. Look at what Paul did with Timothy. He starts telling other people, man, I'm sending Timothy to you because he's the only one out of all these preachers that I've trained. He's the only one that has my heart. Can your pastor or your leader say that about you? Excuse me. Can your leadership say that you have a heart to hold up the arms of the weary person that's trying to lead the ship? Do you have that heart? That's what God's looking for. If you will treat the office with the respect that the Bible tells you to treat it with, then you will shine and you will excel in your position. I mean, this is going to date me. I'm 40 now. But the worship leader bomb when I was raised in church was Darlene Scheck. Darlene. Hillsong. Before United, before all that other stuff. Shout to the Lord. Okay? You guys know what, you feel me. You know what I'm talking about. You can relate. Darlene Scheck was the one. I mean, she was, people wanted to be Darlene Scheck. And, you know, she had a international platform. And you know who I never heard about when I was a kid? Brian Houston. Brian Houston. Brian Houston's the pastor of that church. I didn't even know. I didn't know until I was probably in my 20s that what Hillsong even was. I just knew their music. You know, the music that I had on cassettes. And then when we got really good, we started getting them on these things called compact discs. Okay? And so, that's just a joke. And so, I knew Darlene Scheck, famous around the world. I mean, I would say at that time she was definitely more famous than her pastor. But her pastor was confident enough in himself to step back and let her shine, let her do her thing, because he knew she had a gift. He knew how important worship music was in the church. And his son is there starting to develop United, because his son's probably about my age. And United starts taking off, and you know, we did United songs like crazy when I was a youth pastor. I mean, you know, we were doing some mad United stuff. That was the Delirious. All right, so I know I'm dating myself with some of this, but those were the bands. Those were the things that were popular, that were awesome. Graham Kendrick and March for Jesus. You know, all this stuff was going on back then that was popular. And so what I'm saying is if you will be a blessing to your pastor, get to know your leader, become a Timothy, then God will make you shine, I promise. Because maybe you are called to the full-time senior pastor role, but you're not in it right now. If you're a worship leader, you're not in it right now. So be the best person you can be in the role that you're in, and God will promote. Promotion is not going to come by you backbiting. Promotion is not going to come by you telling lies and spreading rumors and saying, well, the pastor doesn't do this and the pastor doesn't do that, and all the dumb things that people do. We are better than that because we are ministers of the gospel. We've been called to the ministry of reconciliation, not the ministry of saying all things behind their back, okay? And that's the biggest problem in church. And if you will learn to do that, I promise you, God will bless you. God will increase you. God will make his face shine upon you. He will be gracious to you. He will give you all things liberally. He will pour out the windows of heaven on you. He will do things for you that you couldn't even imagine, but you first have to start by having a heart to be under a leader and get to know your leader. Amen? Okay, enough preaching for today. I'll see you tomorrow.